Good morning and welcome to today's JDAP meeting. It is 10:17 a.m. and I would like to officially open today's meeting and acknowledge traditional owners and pay respects to elders past and present on the land in which today's meeting is being held. As you're all aware, we are undertaking the meeting also by electronic means and we will continue to live stream this proposal. There are no apologies for today's meeting and there are no members on leave of absence. We have all panel members with us, including Councillor Fergus Bennett, who is online. The minutes for this JDAP meeting and other JDAP meetings will be available on the website. We have a full panel and we are now moving to part B of the agenda. Members, can I have a show of hands that you have duly considered all matters before you in relation to both items on this agenda? That is unanimous for the minute taker. Members, there are also R13 information loaded to the web, as well as presentation submissions from applicants. Members, can you advise if there are any disclosures of interest for today's meeting? That is nil for the minute taker. We will now move through to item 3.1. We are dealing with these items in the order in which they occur. Firstly, we will hear from the presenter, the applicant, Mr. Carlo Famiano. We will then go to officers at the City of Nedlands before moving on to the item itself. After that, we will progress through the agenda through to item 3.2. I will now ask the presenter if you would like to come forward and present to the panel.
Good morning to all staff and panel members. My name is Carlo Famiano. I'm speaking on behalf of the landowner and developer of the site. We've gone through everything that has been recommended by the City of Nedlands, and I thank the staff of the City of Nedlands for working through this application with us. It's gone through a fairly long journey. It's gone through a lot of meetings. It's gone through a lot of amended plans, and as you can see from the city's RAR, the progression through the DRP, we started off in reds, we ended up with majority greens, and the only issue with the latest feedback from the DRP are the parapet walls, which we'll get onto in a sec. The purpose of today's meeting is to seek an approval for this application as opposed to a deferral or refusal. Certainly don't want a refusal. I think we've done enough work and worked hard with the city to try and get this development to be where it's at. The purpose of the development, and it is an R160 site. It's in close proximity to the Stirling Highway activity corridor. The purpose of the development and the key vision is to try and provide some diversity in housing. So we've got some multiple dwellings at the front, 4 of them, and then you've got your group dwellings at the back, which are 6. So just going through the key reasons for deferral today, and we have since the item was presented to council, spoken to the city about trying to resolve some of the issues and the reasons for deferral. Obviously, the first reason for deferral is the parapet wall setbacks from the site boundaries for the multiple dwellings. I just want to make clear that the group dwelling side of it is supported by the city. We did note that. We saw the information that came through in responses that have been published on the MIDAP website. And obviously, one of the issues with the group dwellings is that we have those new codes coming in on the 10th, and that sort of complicates this application a little bit. And we don't want to lose the efforts and work that we've done so far, just because those new codes come in. So in regard to the parapet walls, we've done a plan, an amended plan. Now, they're only basic at the moment, but it demonstrates that we can take that first level or the second story parapet wall off the boundary. It can be achieved and we can do it. So by all means, that point there can be addressed. The second point was the ceiling heights. Once again, those amended plans that we sent through does introduced the ceiling heights for the multiple dwelling to 2.7 metres. So once again, we can address that matter. The off-street parking and compliance with the Australian standards. Since the report was prepared for council, we have spoken to the city's engineers. So, and the city's engineers actually sent us through a marked up plan in red on what we needed to change. So we've made those changes. So once again, we can address those issues. And the final point is public advertising. The public advertising component, we did do, the application was advertised at the beginning. Essentially, the development was all 3 stories. The only thing that's been introduced at the end of the day was the 4th story at the front. We are below, we believe, we only got 4 submissions at the time. We did address those submissions. And we certainly made a lot of changes to address the concerns raised by the local residents. On top of that, we have a development where we're pulling it in from the sides. We've pushed it back on for the front setbacks. We've actually, the original plan showed a lesser setback at the front. We've got rid of that. We've pushed the building back. So we've actually made a number of changes that soften up the development since it was originally advertised. And at the same time, we are within the maximum height limits. We could go 5 stories here. We're down at 4. So we don't believe that it needs to go back to full advertising again, because we have addressed those, a number of the issues raised. We have pushed the building back. We've provided setbacks. We can get rid of the parapet walls, and the height is in compliance. We did have discussions early on or a few weeks ago with the city in regards to the advertising, and one suggestion was just to go back and have a chat to those that made submissions. I don't think that has happened, but we didn't have an issue at the time with that. But I think at the end of the day, we've done a lot of work with this development. I think it is a good product. It does deliver a bit of housing diversity within the Nedlands area. And it certainly has come a long way design-wise. I think the product that we're proposing on this site is a good outcome for the area. It's certainly reflective of the vision which is proposed for the Stirling Highway Activity Corridor. And it's not pushing the envelope in regards to building height and yields and so on. We've kept it at a reasonable scale development, something that you would anticipate in this area, and is certainly reflective of the built form that's emerging within this area. So just to conclude, we have gone through those conditions. I did see the draft conditions in which the city has provided for the panel. We've gone through those conditions. Don't see any issues with them. We certainly can address them, and happy for them to be included in any approval. So just to conclude, whilst we appreciate the recommendation for deferral, I think the incoming R codes makes it undermines the work that we've done so far on this application. And by all means, the items that have been raised by the city, the concerns, we can certainly address them through the amended plan process. So to conclude, we hope that the panel sees merit in this application and resolves to approve it and impose the conditions that have been recommended by the city. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Panel members, are there any questions at this juncture? Yes.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I note on page 9 of the report that you've referenced 4 Louise Street. That illustration is incorrect. 4 Louise Street is 3 grouped dwellings that have been there and are still there. That would be 24 Louise Street.
Okay, probably, yeah. Apologies for that.
I know it's just a mistake.
We're just taking a snapshot of developments in the area.
It's still
so,
important.
Yeah. Definitely.
Because I checked last night.
Yeah. And
that has not been built. That is, whereas Mountjoy Road has, that's just the render of what will be presented. I'd like you to elaborate a little bit more about the community engagement, please, as you change the plans.
Yes.
The Planning and Development Act and the responsibilities for community engagement, please.
Yeah. Look, the application was, as we know, advertised. There was 4 submissions received. Not saying that that's an insignificant amount, but normally when you have these types of developments, you do attract a lot more submissions. But at the end of the day, we did address those submissions, and the client has spoken to one of the objectors, the property to the north, and has been continuously liaising with that person to try and address a number of issues that they had raised. They had some issues with the dividing fence, some trees. So our client has actually, and still is consulting. I think he was talking to him this morning as well. So we still are liaising with those adjoining owners. We haven't ignored them, and we certainly don't want to ignore them. So the client is happy to be continuing the lines of communication with those adjoining owners. So, and they're the ones that made the submissions during the advertising period. So I feel that the advertising that has been done, the concept is, bar the design of the front units, the concept is still consistent with what was advertised. And we're certainly within the height limit. So I don't necessarily see the need for a full advertising to be done again, or a reason for this to be deferred for advertising, because our client's still liaising with those adjoining owners and the lines of communication.
But that's all being noted and documented.
Yep.
So it's formal, it's not just discussions and
What in relation to
the changes that you're liaising with the adjoining owner. You see, the formal submission process actually formalises it, and that's what's important, the transparency.
Yeah.
So
our client's been transparent with the adjoining owner, yes.
the other question I've got is that you've referenced the character of the area, and yet on that side north of the highway, apart from seeing multi-storey on the highway at the Dalkeith Stirling Highway area, we actually haven't seen a lot of these developments on the north yet. We've seen some, but nowhere near to the same degree of the other side of Nedlands. So while we've got LPS 3, it is still a very much an emerging character, and there's still predominantly in that street in particular, Californian bungalows, single residential homes and the like. And I note that this is an R160 site.
Yeah, just to respond to that, the changing of the codes or the upcoding of the area, I guess is still in its infancy. The take on development is still progressing. So, traditionally this was an R10 area. It's gone to R160. So over time, that character will change. And by going to an R160, it would have been anticipated at the time when we were implementing those, or when the council or government was implementing those codes or the new coding, that the built form of that area would certainly change. It certainly wouldn't remain as a single-storey California bungalow character. There are some emerging developments on the north side that are slowly popping up, but it does take time. Not everyone wants to develop, not everyone wants to sell their property now. They may wait and capitalise on it later on, but it is a vision that eventually those areas will be developed in accordance with the R160 and the R60, I think, next door, which is introduced as well. So
it's just a precedent when you create an R160 development with this height at streetscape, you're actually creating a precedent, and all through your report you are referencing others. Some of those developments are far from, well, they were approved by the JDAP, you get my drift, but there's a responsibility to actually do the best you can with the streetscape and with actually the amenity of the area, because to the people, that is what's really important.
Oh, look, and those points are taken, and in one regard, instead of going 5 stories, we've kept it down to 4 at the front, then we've kept it 3 at the back. It could have been 5 stories all the way through. We elected not to do that, to try and keep the building down in scale and size. And we've put that extra landscaping in at the front to try and soften the development up. So whilst it is 160, there is a vision for this area to eventually have greater density, greater yields, greater numbers, bigger bulk, bigger scale. We've tried to tone it down through landscaping and not pushing it to the maximum height. We've tried to keep it down. So unfortunately, in these areas, it's always the first set of developments that always they seem to hit a rocky road, because you're trying to create the character, that's the vision for the area, and you're the first to do it. If this was probably 3 or 4 years down the track, there would be more developments in that area, and we wouldn't have this discussion. We'd say, well, it's pretty similar to what's already within that area, as other developments have emerged. The examples we use are just examples of this area is changing, and it is. Given the density coding that has been implemented in this area, the character is changing, and it's going to continue to change until there's a downcoding, I guess. It will continue to change, and things are going to get bulkier, things are going to get bigger as housing, there's more demand for housing, as property values increase. These developments will only get bigger.
Thank you. Are there any other questions at this juncture? Yes, Fergus Bennett.
Thank you, presiding member. I have a few questions on, I believe it's page 33 of the papers, the second floor plans. I was just looking at the airflow lines, and it seems like a lot of them are very heavily dependent on toilet windows. And I'm just asking, is that a good amenity outcome for the airflow of those floors to require basically the toilet windows to be open and the toilet door to be open for the airflow to occur?
Yeah, point taken. At the end of the day, I think any airflow through a house or a dwelling is better than none. Unfortunately, there are a number of toilets that are being built and put in houses these days which don't have any windows at all, which don't allow for any airflow whatsoever. We're proposing at least some airflow, so that's better than nothing.
Okay, thank you. And which of these apartments or multiple dwellings are silver level for accessible housing for, you know, to reach the silver level for seniors and things like that?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that, which number it is. Luke, do you know the number, which unit number it is?
I think it's unit 3.
Unit 3. So it's unit 3. And by all means, we are aware that we need to comply with the silver standards, and it is a condition in the recommendations forward by the city. So we certainly will achieve that.
Okay, thank you. The bins along the back boundary, I noticed that there are separate bin stores for the multiple dwellings, which are basically in the lower garage, I think, of the multiple dwellings. But the grouped dwellings, all of their bins seem to be stacked along the back boundary, and I can see that to be an amenity issue for the neighbours on the other side. I was just wondering if those bins could be located against the group dwellings so that they're not in such close proximity to the neighbour's boundary.
We did look at that. We did look at putting the bins within, we did have a couple of bin stores in the front setbacks of the units along the driveway. And we thought that that probably wasn't a good amenity outcome. We wanted to try and keep the landscaping along the driveway and try and soften up and create a nice scenic sort of view down the driveway, and not have rubbish bins sitting in front of units. So we did look at that, but then decided to avoid it because I don't think that that's a good outcome. The number of bins proposed along the back fence are not excessive, and looking at the property to the rear, their house is set well forward on that lot. So there was enough separation between the bins themselves and any habitable spaces or habitable rooms in the dwelling on the rear lot. Once again, I don't think the number of bins are excessive. They're only a small number. And that would be similar to if you had another group dwelling or a single house which puts bins up against a fence. It's a similar sort of scenario. I think at the end of the day, that is probably the best place to put them because it's creating a better amenity for the units within the development, and we don't think it's impacting the property to the rear given the fact that their house is well set back or set forward on their property. There's a large separation between the bins and their home, so I think that's probably the best place to put them. And they're certainly going to be enclosed with fencing, and there's a 1.8 metre high dividing fence to the rear. I don't see it. I think that's probably the better outcome than putting them in front of group dwellings along the driveway.
Okay, thank you. There's been some previous development approvals in Nedlands where the same design has occurred with toilets against that back boundary. And actually, if you think of the view looking down the driveway, if you'll be looking at the bin store directly down the driveway, even pedestrians standing on the footpath looking down the driveway will be looking at the bin store at the end of the driveway. If that was landscaping for trees, as has been with similar approvals, that would actually be an amenity boost for all involved. The neighbours and anybody looking down the driveway would be looking at trees. But anyway, that's just a difference of opinion. Just turning to that landscaping, I was wondering if you would consider a condition to make 50% of the trees in the landscaping plan endemic species, because it seems as though the entire landscaping plan is it doesn't have any endemic tree species in it at all. So I was just wondering, are you against a condition to make 50% of the trees a endemic species?
No issue. I just checked with the client. No issues with that.
Okay, thank you. And also, there's looks like there's room for an additional street tree in the verge to the side of one of the pedestrian footpath entries. I was wondering if you'd be amenable to contributing an endemic tree in the verge there to help build the tree canopy.
Not an issue if it's okay with the if it complies with the city's requirements for street tree planting. Not an issue at all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions at this juncture? Oh, yes, question.
Thanks for the presentation. I've noticed that the application has been on a journey of refinement since its initial submission in July 23. Were you aware that there were still outstanding concerns when you submitted the application of the 11th of March?
Not on the 11th. The concerns emerged once we had a meeting after we had lodged those amended plans. So then hence why we've gone off and try to resolve some of the items that have come back to us. So look, this and defence to everyone involved in this, there has been a lot of toing and froing between us and the city's done a great job getting back to us, trying to keep us updated, assess the plans. We've done a lot of amendments. So there has been a lot of toing and froing. So when we submitted the ones on the 11th, obviously we had a meeting fairly quickly and identified that there were still some of those issues, parapet wall being the main one, and the turning and ceiling heights were the main ones, which straight away we got on to trying to resolve those, and hence why we've given some indicative plans on how we can deal with those. And I think on one side, I think we've still got the parapet wall on the southern side. Just talking to the city staff this morning and to the client, that can come off the boundary the same as it has on the northern side. So we can address those issues that were raised after we had that meeting following the submission on the 11th.
I'm just confused because wouldn't it have made a lot more sense to say, hold this off before it goes to DAP so that we can iron it all out and,
look, we
present something that everybody can live with.
Look, I agree with you there, and initially we did speak to the city about deferring this, but the complexities of the new codes coming through for the group dwelling bit component throws a spanner in the works. So if we deferred it, we'd literally have to start again, and all of that work that we've done with the city will just be thrown to the side just to deal with those group dwellings. The multiple dwelling side of it, we can address those issues, and we've demonstrated that we can. And we don't have an issue with the condition being imposed for us to submit an amended plan to put those setbacks in and the ceiling heights and whatever else is needed. We can deal with it. Deferring it, I guess, at the end of the day, would send us back to almost the beginning. And we've done too much work over the last several months to just throw all of that in the bin. So that's why I think we are here today, trying to seek an approval as opposed to deferral. But we weren't, put it this way, if the new codes weren't coming in next week, by all means, it would be fine. But unfortunately, the lead up time given to the industry this time around with the new codes is not enough. I remember when they were supposed to come in last year in September, the department gave a 3-month leeway. This time around, we've only got 1 month. That's not enough to try and deal with stuff, try and get applications out of the system.
Thank you. Then I have another query. So
No problem.
Yes, go for it.
the in the plans that you submitted 2 days ago,
Yes.
where you indicated that it was possible to make changes to make it more acceptable. I compared the landscaping plans that were submitted as part of that batch with the original ones. I didn't see any difference between the landscaping plans. Can you tell me whether actually more deep soil area is being proposed? I would have thought that you would have wanted to get more deep soil area so that it could justify the walls on the boundaries on both sides, but I couldn't see anything.
Yeah, there are some changes. We've put more trees in, especially in the front setback. We've got rid of the hard stand for the visitor parking bays, put grass blocks in, so it allows for some more growth underneath those grass blocks for those trees that were put in the front setback area, because we put more in there. So there are some changes, and we certainly have put more trees in, got rid of some hard stand, and generally.
But there's no increase in deep soil area.
Well, if you include the area underneath what was hard stand and it's no longer hard stand, then that would be an increase because that allows for growth underneath those grass blocks. So yeah, we would have.
Any further questions? Thank you. I have a couple of questions. My questions are, start with the easy one first. I understand that the bin location, bin pickup, is, from reading the documentation here, bins are being picked up from street by city delivery, by the city's waste services. Yeah, so there's no waste pickup by trucks on site.
No. Okay. So our waste person has had lengthy discussions with the city's waste team to try and resolve those issues.
Thank you. My second question is the alternate design. I'm specifically speaking, a question is in relation to point 1 of the deferral, which refers to the concerns relating to setback. The material that you presented to us as part of your submission, I've got the 2 on the screen here so I can compare them. So got a couple of questions in the middle of that. The first is that the ground floor plan, for all intents and purposes, is permanently the same in terms of, and I am specifically speaking about the front dwellings, I should say.
Yes, the multiple dwellings.
The multiple dwellings at the very front. So they are predominantly the same with parapet wall on either boundary. As I scroll down to the next level, which is referred to as the first floor, I note that the parapet wall on the southern side is the same, but you have, sorry, hang on a second, let me make sure I'm calling the right side. Yes, on the southern side is predominantly a 2-storey, and on the northern side, that adjoining the R60, has been pulled in 1.2 metres. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So that can be done on the other side as well, on the southern side. It can be done.
So my question, given that you've just made an extra comment, are you saying that you are, I'm reading this as saying you could address the northern side, but there's no concept here about southern?
No, because initially we pushed the northern side off the boundary because that's R60 next door.
Yeah.
So being mindful of the lower coding, we made the amendment. Initially, when we were thinking about this on the southern side, it's R160. More than likely that will be redeveloped in the future and probably with a bigger development. So we were toying with the concept of keeping it on that boundary for the second level. However, through discussions this morning and through looking at the additional information provided by the city to the DAP, which we managed to read off the website, we can make the same change to the southern side. So that side can come off the boundary. We haven't shown it obviously in the plans that you've got, because we've only said this morning we can achieve that. So through the condition that the city is recommending in its draft conditions, we can certainly achieve bringing that off the boundary, and we can do that through an amended plan. So both of them will come off.
No, I understand. My question was specifically around what you're asking for today. And I know that, as I say, the northern is shown in the alternate plan, your presentation request plans. So I'm just clarifying that comment.
Yeah, so the difference is from when I submitted my presentation the other day to today is that we've had further discussions and we can bring that off the boundary. So by all means, if an approval is granted, that condition which the city is recommending to push the second level for both sides off the boundary 1.2 can be done. And happy to do that. Okay. And we're supportive of it.
And the floors above it,
they're all set back.
They're pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Okay. What is the plan that we've got in front of us? Your submission to your presentation is currently unsubmitted to the city. Is that what it is?
It's not formally submitted. We have sent it through to the city, so they have seen it. But given time, I don't expect them to do a full assessment of it. That can be dealt with as part of the condition for amended plan.
So
but we have sent it. We've sent everything through. We've tried to keep the lines of communication between us and the city open at all times. So whenever we change, we send it through. Whenever we are thinking of something, we contact them, we talk to them, we have meetings. We've kept the line open all the way through.
So is the purpose of this plan as part of your presentation for DAP members to be clear or to understand that modification can occur within the frame of the proposal submitted in a functional, providing for a functional operational design?
Yes. So that's the whole.
Because there was a question in the question in the RA about significance of design change. That's the question I've got.
Yeah. Yeah, the purpose of the plan that we sent through was obviously not for you to approve it.
No, I appreciate that. Yes.
And not for the city to have a full assessment done in time. Yeah. It's just to demonstrate that we can do it and it can be done through a condition.
That's what my question's going to be, yes. And that's my question. Sorry to jump in there, but you got where I was trying to clarify my own mind. My last question is about your comments about deferral.
Yep.
I'm curious your comment around the incoming codes and the impact of the incoming codes on the proposed process that you've been through. What I heard your comments today was that you're more that there was a significant concern about the effort and work done to date, and therefore that would be lost should there be a deferral because of the incoming codes. Could you clarify further what other concerns? Is it that the codes would require, the incoming codes would require significant design changes? Can you clarify a little bit further, because I didn't quite get that full aspect myself.
Yeah, it will result in design changes. It would also result in having to go through that whole assessment process again under the new codes, because we pretty much have to make a lot of changes to those group dwellings to try and meet up with the new codes. So that is one concern, and obviously, speaking on behalf of the client, sending this further down the road for more amended plans, more assessment periods, it just drags this further down the road and has impacts on investments. But that's not the key reason for wanting to avoid deferral. The key reason is that to meet the requirements of the new codes, because the next time this comes up to the panel, if it is deferred, we'd have to address those new codes. It means we have to do so much more work to change the design, to go through the whole process again. And we've done that with the city already. And like I said, the city has worked with us and we appreciate their efforts. But I think to drag them through that again is not fair.
So I've got the same question I'm going to ask you as I'm going to ask the city. No, so what do you say are the significant areas of concern that you're referring to under the incoming codes? And my question is in the context of due regard.
No problem.
So what sort of significant changes are you saying they would generate? And that's, as I say, in the context of amenity and due regard.
Yeah, not a problem. I think some of the changes that would result of the new codes is the outdoor areas or the garden areas, they call them new codes, private open spaces. That could cause an issue and require rejigging. I think solar orientation might require rejigging. We haven't done a full assessment against the new codes because we're focusing on trying to get it under the current codes. But just looking at the new codes and going through them, you've got courtyards, probably solar orientation, potentially some of the dimensions of rooms and access to ventilation and those sort of things. So there are a few things that will emerge which will cause some changes.
Thank you. They are my only questions. Is there any further questions from panel members? If not, thank you very much. We'll go to city officers. How many of you wish to come forward?
Report was written to the March 28th plans. Our engineers are satisfied with those in terms of the vehicle access gradient, the access, and that sort of thing. So we're satisfied that can be a condition of approval. The floor to ceiling heights of the multiple dwellings, that can be a condition of approval. They're still within the maximum heights, that's fine. Basically our remaining issues are those side and boundary walls and the advertising period. So that's all I'd say for now.
Any other comments you wish to make? Panel members, are there questions to officers? Yes.
Yeah, look, just with the amended approval conditions, it refers only to the northern elevation. Can you just elaborate? I understand the site to the south is 160, but I'd just like to hear you talk it through why you're not requiring a setback to the first floor along the southern boundary of multiple dwelling as part of that condition, because my reading is it's only the northern elevation.
I suppose ultimately we still stand by the deferral. We're not satisfied with that condition that's been provided at request of the R13. But ultimately it is because it's abutting another R160 lot. We have less concerns. There was no neighbour submissions from that lot. It's not that we have no concerns. Ultimately, we do think that it could be improved, but should the DAP seek to approve it, we'd recommend it for the north only.
It was ultimately, yeah, those were the plans submitted, so we modified the conditions to meet those indicative plans.
Sorry, could I just clarify? You're referring to the plans in the row?
No, the plans submitted afterwards.
Okay, as part of the submission, the one that we've got in front of us. Sorry, just want to clarify that. So sorry, can I just add to that? Sure. So I'm really clear. Your response in the R13 also made reference to the plans that the applicant submitted in their presentation request?
Yes, those are the.
Thank you. Sorry, I just want to get that clear. Chair.
Just on the matter of the new codes coming through, I'm just would like to hear your view on how much this might affect the group dwellings at the rear.
I think it will be primarily, as Carla mentioned as well, the courtyard spaces will probably have to increase in size and more landscaping. I don't think it's unachievable. I think that can be done, but it will require redesign to some extent.
Questions? Any other questions? Yes.
Just following on from the boundary walls on the northern and southern side. So even if the southern side were to be pulled back and you only have a single story wall on that side, we still have an issue that we've got boundary walls on more than one side, right? Because under the shack plan, you are meant to only have boundary walls on one side unless you have a lot more landscaping.
Yep, that's correct. I would also highlight that it's not purely the boundary walls that we still have issue with, it's also with the fourth story under the end shack. That should be a 3 metre side setback. So there are 2 reasons for our deferral, to address both the boundary walls and the side setbacks to the fourth story.
And then I have one other question. The grass blocks, do you consider that as landscaping or do you consider that as parking?
Yeah, it is technically landscaping. It's not our preference, but
okay. Thank you.
Yes, further questions?
To the city officers, I use acronyms all the time. I was just wanting you to explain to the viewers or anyone who should watch this on YouTube later, NSHAC. Would you tell them about the Nedlands Stirling Highway Activity Corridor, please, briefly?
Yeah, so it's the Nedlands Stirling Highway Activity Center Corridor. It's a local planning policy that came into effect last year. And it essentially acknowledges the fact that this area has been upcoded, but it also intends to try to have any new development sort of reflect the traditional streetscapes of Nedlands. So there is call for greater setbacks than in the R codes, front setbacks in the R code specifically, and more landscaping to sort of retain the idea of those large landscape yards that we currently have. And that's the main goal of it. It's acknowledging that yes, you're not going to have 9 meter front setbacks anymore, but we do want to see some semblance of that sort of pattern carried through.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah. Well, have you got a comment following on from Councillor Bennett about the airflow and also when the new codes come in, solar, that wasn't touched on before. We touched on courtyard side and landscaping, but could you comment on those 2, airflow and solar, please?
so the airflow through the toilets, as Councillor Bennett highlighted, is sort of secondary to the main airflow. So I believe it would still achieve the codes in terms of getting at least one form of airflow. I think most of them go through the living area and the bedroom, and then the toilet one is additional to that.
Solar, what about
that? The solar one's a bit more tricky in that I guess it just hasn't been assessed for the group dwelling components as yet. For the multiple dwellings, we are satisfied with solar as presented.
Thank you. Any further questions? Yes, Fergus Bennett.
Thank you, presiding member. A question for the officers. Can you explain a little bit more? Has this design changed significantly enough that really it should be re-advertised, and basically the community needs to know that what is actually being proposed now is slightly different to what they were told was being proposed? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so when the original plans that were advertised were significantly different in terms of they had 10 group dwellings. Those group dwellings were undersized. There were 3 vehicle access points. It was only 3 stories. From memory, there were no parapet walls. So it is a very different application to what we see today. We did informally send the plans that you have before you to the 4 submitters, and we did receive 2 objections on those plans. Our public consultation local planning policy does say that if a design has significantly changed, which it may affect neighbours, it should be re-advertised. So ideally, yes, we would like to see those re-advertised, particularly in regards to the additional height, the change in the dwelling types, and the setbacks and parapet walls.
Thank you. With the parapet walls, how would that problem normally be solved? Does it need some kind of articulation, or should it be a reduced height, like not a 2-story parapet wall, only 1 story? What is the normal solution for that kind of problem?
So simply, it should be a 1-story boundary wall in accordance with the NSHAC policy.
Yeah, particularly facing that street front, that's when we want those boundary walls pushed back, basically.
Thank you. And just one last question. If I was able to successfully move a condition along the lines of 50% of the trees need to be endemic and 1 large endemic tree planted in the verge to the satisfaction of the city, would you be able to draft that if I were to move it later?
We could draft it so the endemic species is fine. And the only concern I have about the verge tree is that the properties directly to the north and the south, their driveways and crossovers are right on the boundary. For to allow for tree root zones, our tech services recommends at least a 2-meter setback from that. So I don't know how much space there would be on the boundary or in the verge, sorry, to put a tree in there.
Sure, they can plant a smaller tree. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? I have a number of questions, and my questions go to the deferral reasons. The side setback and boundary wall, I'll go to that first comment. I understand from the original material that you've indicated that point 2, floor ceiling height, can be resolved by a condition. Car parking is satisfactory. So the side and setback, we talked a few moments ago, you made comment about impact. You referred to the concerns regarding the boundary wall, and there was a secondary comment in relation to the setback or the streetscape view. What my understanding, and if you can clarify it, is the context of your comments were in relation to character of the area. The plans that we have been provided as part of a submission, and they don't form part of the planning application or the determination, indicated that the applicant could achieve removal of the 2nd level parapet wall whilst maintaining functionality of the units. And I am talking about front multiple dwellings. So in that context, my question goes to those 2 points that you raised. Does moving the parapet away from the boundary address the concerns about the streetscape that you referred to in terms of character of the area? Or is there something additional? And I'm specifically referring to your policy position, which talks about larger areas having landscaped and frontage to the street. And I note that your application in the RA, you haven't raised issue with the setback to the street, but you're talking about bringing in of the 2nd level from a streetscape. That's part 1. And part 2 is your earlier comment about the setbacks on the top level. And if you can speak to that, and it goes to my consideration of the deferral that is currently on the table at the beginning of, that is currently at the beginning of the RA. So I'd like to get some further comments in relation to the first point of deferral in those comments.
First point or the second point?
Yes, so the boundary walls and that upper floor. So the NSHAC policy, it contemplates a 4th floor basically pushed back further from the street and the side boundaries. To be fair, I don't think the policy anticipated a subdivision of a lot and having a small lot like this right on the street. It anticipated that, like, for instance, the whole lot would be a multiple dwelling, which would allow you to have those further setbacks without severely impacting the actual design of the building. But what we have now with the indicative plans submitted after the RIR and then submission are on the northern side, there's single boundary wall, and then it goes up straight up 1.2 separation all the way up to the 4th floor. So the in-check policy would actually like to see that 4th floor pushed in from the side and a little bit back from the front, and ideally.
In relation to your second point, more on functionality, my concern with just addressing the setbacks via a condition is it will change the room sizes. I suppose they will be below the acceptable outcome room sizes from what we've seen on the plans that the applicant has provided. So simply that hasn't been addressed, and whether that hasn't been assessed, and we're not sure if that would meet the element objectives or not. So we would like to see that not as a condition. We want to actually be able to have that and assess it against the art codes.
Okay. So are you saying that the setback requirements in the context of the plan that's submitted, which is a response from the applicant in terms of dealing with a deferral condition and a request that an approval could have a condition to modify the buildings that would satisfy the deferral, point 1?
Yeah.
Are you saying that the provisions that the provisions you have, a condition doesn't create certainty as to what those setbacks would be expected, and therefore the impact on the form and scale as well as functionality is unclear and too great a leap to just condition it out? Is that what you're saying? Because the city's requirement for setbacks could look something significantly different than this proposal that is shown as a concept as part of the applicant's submission. I hope I'm not making a mouthful of words, but
yes, essentially, we are uncertain if just by pushing the setback in, it may go some way to addressing the bulk and scale and the form, but it might result in other issues in terms of the functionality of the apartments, particularly the room sizes.
And is that specifically in relation to the top level? The one you're talking about as having, as the city saying the setback should be greater than?
It would apply to both that second floor, sorry, first floor and 4th floor.
Okay, okay, I'm going to come back to that one in a minute. Yep, okay, I understand what you're telling me. My second question in relation to the deferral reasons is the re-advertise. Could you explain why it is so important to re-advertise in the context that you have spoken, albeit informally, you have consulted with the impacted neighbours in terms of amenity impacts? Can you explain why there is a need to re-advertise it? And I make that comment also in the context of the RA that talks about the majority of changes, sorry, not in the RA, in the R13 response, that the majority of changes appear to be positive. You talk that in the context of modifications to from the original plans to these plans.
Yeah, we do stand by the proposal has gotten better from a purely planning perspective, but it's still due process to consult with our community and keep people informed and take any of their comments on board. Informally, we have still got objections, and they are to valid planning discretion, so to speak. Yes, we just believe it's due planning process that our community should be consulted on something that they haven't seen.
Particularly if there's the 2-story boundary wall, Mr. Romain, because that hasn't been seen before.
So the 2-story boundary.
Particularly if there's the 2-story boundary wall remains, yes.
Okay. Any other questions? I have a question to the applicant, actually. At this juncture, it's quite prudent that I ask this question. It goes to the point 1 of deferral, and it goes to your comments in relation to modification of the plan as shown in your presentation was aimed at showing the panel members that an approval with a condition would achieve the requirements of the city in terms of the setback concerns. What I'm hearing from the city at this juncture is that they're talking about a setback, particularly on the upper level, which is much greater than the plans on the presentation would indicate. And what they're saying is that there is not clarity of understanding as to what an expectation would be on setback, because as I understand it, there's still a variation.
Yes.
Do you have any comments you want to make on that?
Yeah,
I'm trying to get understanding as to whether all the parties.
yeah, well, we're under the impression that the variation to the setbacks were being looked at favourably, and it was only the parapet wall that was the key issue, hence why it was listed in the reasons for deferral, and that's why we addressed it. We thought that the other variation was being accepted, and there wasn't an issue with it, therefore we didn't need to address it.
Oh, sorry, that's the difference between the front setback and the side setback. So the front setback, we're talking about the upper floor, the final upper floor setback. That was the final issue.
So are you talking about the front setback on the upper floor or the side setback?
Side setback on the upper floor.
Okay, right. So we're all sort of on page.
Yeah.
Jill, sorry, would you like to continue comment in that context?
Just the same as what I previously said. I thought that they were acceptable, hence they weren't listed as a reason for deferrals, more the parapet wall that we needed to address, and that was the reason for deferral. So that's why we targeted that component of the design, because that's what we thought we needed to do. So like I said, we've tried to make changes whenever we've asked to. So
thank you. Are there any further questions at this junction? Can I just have the officers, my last question, I know it's in your R13, I can't find it fast enough. Can you, I know there's a deemed to comply and a alternate design. Can you just run me through that particular issue, the deemed to comply provision that you're referring to? I want to understand how far apart both city and applicant are on this specific issue about, and this goes to the question of clarity and certainty, which goes to the question of whether or not a condition could be considered.
So I suppose the problem is also that it's volume 2, so there is no specific deemed to comply, but our policy requires a 1.5 metre setback, so 1.2 we're considering. To the 4th floor, it's a 3 metre setback. So, and they're proposing 1.2.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any further questions from panel members at this junction? Okay, we move back to the agenda. We have a recommendation in the RA at the beginning of the RA. The recommendation is for a deferral. Is there a mover of the recommendation in the RA? It is moved. Councillor Fergus in it. Is there a seconder for the recommendation in the RA? It is seconded. Councillor Rebecca Coghlan. Would the mover like to speak to the item?
Thank you, presiding member. Yes, we've heard that the side boundary parapet walls are problematic in that they're on 2 boundaries and also basically 2 stories high. And additionally, on top of that, the top story of the multiple dwellings has only, I think, the same side setback as the lower levels, which is it's only 1.2 when it should be 3 meters. And I think the purpose of the policy stipulating only 1 boundary having parapet walls, and it should be limited to 1 story, and the upper stories should have a bigger setback. That whole concept is about reducing the bulk and scale on the neighbours. It's an amenity issue. Instead of design should be such that the neighbours still have basically breathing room. They don't have a large building right up against the boundary looming over them. There's enough room on this block to actually provide those setbacks. And we've also heard that the design has changed so much. And I think the fact that we've discussed this at length, there is actually some confusion about what is actually being proposed. There would certainly be confusion in the community who received advertising for a certain design, and here we are considering approving or possibly approving something that is very different. And I think that to some extent undermines the whole consultation with the community. And I think the community is quite sensitive about not being fully involved. And so I think it's correct to really, when designs change substantially, it is actually a fair thing for a short deferral of a few months, and that does actually provide enough time for the community to be consulted again. And then I will make one point that the proponent actually mentioned that deferring wouldn't send us back to the beginning. So I don't think this is the end of the world to defer this for a few months. I think we can provide the extra time to sort out the problems with the side setbacks and the parapet boundary walls, and advertise it again so that we're doing it the right way in terms of giving the community a fair chance to comment on what is basically a substantially changed design. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the secretary like to speak to the item?
Yes, I would. I also stand by the principles behind community engagement, and I also stand by the city officers who actually said we recommended a deferral. They didn't back off on what they actually recommended, and for that, that should be noted. There's been an hour of discussions about this development application, and I note that the City of Nedlands, when it considered the RAR at our last ordinary council meeting, they also recommended deferral. So it actually, there's enough doubt at the moment about this development to actually defer it for 90 days, come back and actually look at how it can be improved. Whether or not there's a new code coming in that might alter it should not actually be what we're talking about today, because we're looking at it. However, I still feel that there's an element of we want to get this through, and that's not the correct way to go about planning, orderly and proper planning. And there's an important precedent here. As I said earlier on, the precedent is that this will be referenced later on when we see other applications. This is a chance to get it right, and so I strongly recommend that this is deferred, and particularly that it goes out to community engagement. One objection is enough. We haven't given the community a fair go, and that trust gets eroded. They're already not able to get as involved in the development application process as they would like because of the way it has evolved in the last decade. The fair chance is the community engagement, and the city has stated that they are not satisfied with that. And I don't think as a panel we should be satisfied with that either.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers on the motion on the table? Yes.
Yeah, look, I'm going to be supporting deferral simply because I don't feel confident approving something without actually having seen all the issues ironed out, and we really don't know what revised plans will look like at this stage. I was just trying to find when I went to the design review, and I think it was back in February, but I just think it's a bit of a shame that trying to address this issue was left to more or less the last minute. And I do acknowledge, however, that the applicant has tried to work with council and come up with various other options. But look, I'm just not confident about approving something with a condition relating to that northern elevation. I mean, I understand the issue with the land to the south being R160 and it will be redeveloped, but it may not be redeveloped for a long time. So I just feel a little more comfortable with the deferral proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers on the motion?
Yes, I would
Yes.
like to say something. Thank you through you, Linda. For me, for this proposal, the planning framework seems to not have been the first consideration, with the result that the proposal needed to be revised, refined on the go, right up to the 11th hour. I'm not convinced that the best planning outcome can be achieved with a proposal that is as heavily conditioned as the applicant is requesting. I think the proposal has merit, but I feel that it needs to fully complete its process. One, to be an open and accountable decision for the open and accountable decision-making perspective, which should include the appropriate amount of advertising. And secondly, for the benefit of the proposal, there may still be other refinements that we cannot see at this moment that will improve the quality of the product. We've heard ventilation through toilets, better location of bins, changes to the southern boundary, and the medium density codes are designed to provide a better outcome for the group dwelling. So I will also be supporting the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. I will speak to the item, the motion. I do not support a deferral. The reasons for that is that the planning framework for the site is R160. The applicant has provided, albeit not a part of the actual application, a comment that condition 1 or deferral 1 can be achieved. And they've also referred to discussions been had around achievement of deferral reason 2 and 3. The question of re-advertising, again, I have questions about the rationale for re-advertising and fundamentally the concerns that have been referred to in the RA, many of which are addressed. The key sticking point appears to be the side boundary setback, particularly on the southern side. I note that the southern side is a transition to an R60, not necessarily the existing built form, whilst that is part of the consideration. And from my perspective, I think that the transition by setting the building back, moving back the upper level as shown on the concept, goes some way to addressing and ameliorating the issue. Like all planning provisions, the upper floor setback at the very top level is subject to discussion. From my perspective, a blanket setback provision is not necessarily the final position. From my perspective, the R codes have pathway for due consideration on them, and unlike previous codes that have been in place, there is no definitive setback requirement that must be had. It's all considered in due regard. As I say, I am conscientious of the transition, but I'm also conscious that this site does hold an R160 zoning. The applicant has indicated, and the plans show us, that the built form has been considered in the character and context, particularly in relation to a combination of unit types, being multiple dwellings at the front with rear dwellings of group dwelling, and has sought to consider height and scale overall as part of the whole proposal, not just one or two elements of the proposal. I think that the proposal is, in the context of the zoning, in context of the area, supportable with a series of conditions and could be managed in that way. So from my perspective, I don't support the deferral as it presently stands. Those are my comments. I move back to the mover for right of reply and close of debate on the motion.
Thank you, Presiding Member. Yes, I think it's problematic to have approvals with conditions that basically stipulate quite significant changes to the plans because it requires basically a leap of faith to visualize what those changes will be, and it's difficult for a decision maker to basically anticipate any of the unforeseen problems that might arise. We have been, the city officers have alluded to changing the boundary setbacks and the side setbacks to upper floors and changing the dimensions, that building envelope. It can have follow-on effects to amenity. Perhaps the building, the room sizes will be distorted such that accessibility is limited, or perhaps windows will have to be changed or size of windows altered, and the airflow will change. And so there are a number of follow-on effects that as a decision maker, we must be wary of considering having conditions of approval that say, yes, you can have conditions, but something on the plans have to be changed and we can't actually see those changes in front of us. We're just supposed to envisage them as a condition. I don't think that's a good way to conduct planning decision making. For the sake of 3 months, I think it's wise to follow the responsible authorities recommendation and sort out these issues, respect the local planning policy, because Nedlands has taken a while to get local planning policies in place, and so it's been a convenient excuse not to consider draft policies. But this policy is actually not a draft policy; it's an enforced policy. And so now that there is an enforced policy there, to disregard it, I also think that in a sense disregards the community's wishes, because those policies were formed in conjunction with feedback from that community. And so on top of that, during the 3 months of this deferral, I think it's reasonable to re-advertise it. We know it's not going to be a huge number of respondents. It'll be probably the same 4 respondents who are directly impacted around the development as before. And I think they should be made aware that this development is slightly different, and hopefully with some beneficial changes in a few months' time, they will have a new development advertised to them, and all that will have been lost is 3 months before the proponent can go ahead with their plans. I think this is a deferral is the most cautious and the fairest thing to do for all involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Right of reply has been had. Close of debate. We are going to the vote in the recommendation for deferral. All those in favour?
Could I just check, please? I want to know the date is in the deferral, please. And I want to check that we're actually voting on the deferral as seen in the RAR. I know we do our minutes after and we revise them, but I think for transparency, I really want to know that before I vote.
So the motion that's been moved on the table is the RAR recommendation deferral as it reads in its entirety, which appears for 120 days.
Which is
in
the 2nd of August.
So there's been no, when the mover moved it on to the debate, there was no change to as appears in your agenda. So that's what's just been discussed, and that's what, as I understand, is that correct from the mover? You have moved exactly as it reads in the agenda. Yep, so that's what we're voting on.
And we've got a date.
120 days from today, this is 2nd of August.
Does that clarify your question?
I think it's very important on the YouTube that we know that everybody who may listen to it later, it may be used in a learning opportunity, that we get it right. Thank you.
Thank you. We are going to the vote. Clarity has been requested. It is the motion as appears in its entirety in the agenda. All those in favour? Against? It is carried 4-1. Has the minute taker got the vote?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. We now move forward to item 3.2. 3.2, we also have a presentation. Oh, sorry, we're going to just go for we just adjourned for 5 minutes, sorry. We did get a request for that. It is 11:30 and we are just adjourning for a few minutes. Thank you. It is 11:35 a.m. and we recommence the meeting. We are now moving to item 3.2, which is 12 group dwellings. We have a presenter, Mr. Stephen Di Piazzi. Would you like to come forward? You have indicated that you're here for questions. Is there anything you'd like to make comment on before we go to questions?
Thank you. Just like to indicate my thanks to the city for working through us with this. We made a number of changes through the process and we've arrived at a pretty good outcome for the site. So yeah, as you mentioned, I'm happy to answer any questions that the panel may have.
Thank you. Panel members, are there any questions to this presenter?
I do have a question.
Yes.
Is the intention, I know that we're talking about 3 separate lots and they don't need to be amalgamated because there's no building over boundaries and so on. Is the intention that it will be, that the whole complex will be constructed in one go, or are you looking at going lot by lot?
My understanding is that they'll be developing the whole thing in one go.
Okay, and then I have another question, if I may, Presiding Member. What is the intention in regards to the boundary fencing? Is this development proposing new boundary fencing as part of this development, or are you hoping to rely on the existing boundary fencing?
I believe we'll have to provide new fencing because there's quite a lot of level changes. The site actually has a very significant slope. So where, generally speaking, I think in most locations, it'll probably be slightly higher than the current location. So usually the existing fence will be removed and a new one placed on top to ensure that privacy is still maintained.
Thank you.
Thank you. And any other questions at this juncture? There are no other questions. Thank you. City officers. City officers, do you have any comments you would like to make at this juncture?
No, we don't have any comments. We're just here to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions to city officers? Yes.
Okay, thank you, Presiding Member. We have an overlooking issue on this western boundary. And if the fencing ends up not to be installed on top of the retaining walls, how will you ensure that overlooking, that there is no overlooking? We've heard from the applicant that the fencing is going to be installed as part of the development, but if for some reason it isn't, or the fencing is not installed on top of the proposed retaining walls, there will be an overlooking issue due to the level differences. Is that something you've taken into account, or have you assumed that fencing will happen as part of this development and will be on top of the retaining walls?
So yeah, we are assuming that dividing fencing will be installed on top of the retaining, but if it isn't, it is being imposed by condition 7 that they will need to put screening up to 1.6 metres above the initial level on their side.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Oh, we just lost our. Are there any other questions from panel members? Yes.
Would you like to comment on the landscaping and the landscaping at the rear along the western boundary and endemic species, please?
Yes, I don't think we had a condition for endemic species. Obviously, that's the applicant's happy to put it on. That's fine. That's something that can be worked out as part of the landscaping plan. In terms of the landscaping in the rear, do you want to talk about that?
Just a side note as well, we also have recommended an amended landscaping plan be submitted prior to the issue of a building permit. I'll just get that up, what the exact condition that is. That's condition 11, and then there's also advice note advice note number 4, which talks about what we want to see on the revised landscaping plan. That was some suggestions that was raised from our DRP chairperson as well. So it doesn't talk about endemic species specifically, but as Nathan had said, that can be put in. But it's just to provide some further information on species selection, ground covers, paving types, and then also conditions on water efficient design. Sorry.
What's the, may I please ask
Yes, you
another
continue,
question?
yes.
I want a bit more of an expansion, please, on this landscaping plan, because the community considers that the deep soil trees, not only do they contribute to the canopy, which is rich in this area traditionally, and with what people associate Nedlands and other leafy suburbs in Western Australia, but it provides much needed relief from height and bulk and privacy. And we've just heard about the levels, different levels, and there is a chance that even though they've been upcoded to R60 on the western side, that those substantial Californian bungalows you can see on the intramaps, they may stay. So we're talking about a development that may sit there for the next 40 years and will define that area. So I really need to hear a lot more about the deep soil, and particularly the use of deep soil in the rear and the opportunity for them to thrive. Is there enough area for them?
So the landscaping plan obviously shows a lot of planting back there. In terms of deep soil, these are group dwellings. So at the moment, there's no specific deep soil zone as there is for multiple dwellings. However, the plans do show that there's area uncovered around the trees for planting. We haven't gone into depth on the dimensions because again, it's group dwellings, which until the newer codes come in, it's very limited on sort of deemed to comply aspects of what's controlled. But they do have a substantial amount of landscaping on it. And like I said, they're outdoor, next to the outdoor courtyards, they do have large areas that could potentially be used as that.
Yes, continue.
What do you consider though, is this a missed opportunity given that we've got an R160 to the south and that we've got the group dwellings in Jenkins, which also lack opportunities for planting? This is a 3-lot development. I'm just exploring this because I can understand that it is a group dwellings and that the newer codes haven't been adopted yet, but is this a missed opportunity to contribute to the canopy? Because they are the questions that will be being asked, plus the amenity of the inhabitants of these houses, future inhabitants.
In terms of actual availability, just looking at it, there's probably not a 6x6 meter zone for what the R code volume 2 would require as a large tree. But again, there's very little controls on the size of the trees that we can impose either through our codes or through the local planning policy that we have. So what they've shown is while there may not be one single overall large tree, they do have a lot of smaller plantings that could potentially provide some shade. But it's difficult to actually say they have to have a large tree. They have to have this meterage of space because we don't have those statutory controls in place to do that. So we can encourage them, but that's as far.
So we could condition it in this?
Probably not, because there's no statutory mechanism that says this is a consideration or this would be required.
Any further questions? Any further questions from panel members? Yes, Fergus Bennett.
Thank you, presiding member. Yes, I just wanted to ask the city officers to have a condition ready for 50% endemic tree species and an additional verge tree of endemic species as well? Because I can see in the verge there's room for at least one large tree outside basically on the northern side of the northern driveway. There's enough room there for a tree to be planted. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions at this juncture? If not, we move to the agenda. There's a recommendation at the beginning of the RA. Is there a mover for the RA recommendation? Any movers for the RA recommendation? It is moved, Leo Donoghue. Is there a seconder for the RA recommendation? Is there a seconder? It is seconded. Gabriella Ponzan. Would the mover like to speak to it?
Yes, look, I'll be brief. This application has gone through one revision, and I don't really have a lot to say about it, except that I think it's well designed. I think it will be an attractive addition to the street, and I think that it will also, again, provide a diversity of housing type within this area. So I'm quite supportive of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the second like to speak to it?
Thank you, Presiding Member. I too support this proposal because it will give Nedlands another form of housing, which I think is a welcome addition. I would just suggest that that condition 2 be amended instead of a period valid for 2 years, that should be increased to 4 years in line with the regs. In relation to the street tree that the councillor is seeking, I do not believe I do not believe it's within the realm of this development application to ask for a street tree. That is the town's role to identify spaces on the verge that can get additional trees. In relation to endemic trees, I have no issue with that. I think it could be an advice note. And in relation to large trees, I agree with the officers that there is no legislative basis to require certain size trees, and therefore I do not believe it is something that we can do. I also note that all the trees that were on the site at one point in time have actually been removed.
Thank you. Could I just clarify, is the mover and seconder agreeing to modification to condition 2 for a 4-year approval, not 2 years? So can have the minutes reflect that what's being moved onto the table is the RA recommendation inclusive of a modification to the condition for time, which is 4 years. So members, that's what's currently at the motion on the table. And the reason is consistent with, for that element, is to be consistent with the legislation. Is there any further speakers on the motion? Councillor Fergus Bennett.
Thank you, Presiding Member. Yes, I wanted to move those 2 amendments, move them separately so that the panel can vote on them separately. One was a condition to require that 50% of the trees in the landscaping plan be endemic species to the satisfaction of the city. And then the second amendment was that the proponent provide additional tree planting in the verge also of an endemic tree species to the satisfaction of the city.
And you wish to deal with those separate amendments?
Yes, please.
Thank you. So we're dealing with the first of the amendment. Is there a seconder for the first amendment, which is condition for 50% of trees, 50% of landscaping to be endemic, I can't speak today, endemic species to the satisfaction of the city? Is there a seconder for, sorry, it is seconded. Would the mover like to continue speaking to it, or we'll go to the seconder?
I'll just speak briefly. The 50% endemic tree species, we've had that condition on previous approvals. I think it's a good idea because although Nedlands is considered part of the inner city, does have quite significant ecological value, and it's adjacent to many large parks and has Swan River frontage. So it actually does support quite a lot of wildlife, which adds to the amenity of the area. I moved the second point separately about the street tree and the verge. I understand that it's outside the development area, but proponents often do actually appreciate the chance to plant additional tree plantings. And if it sounds as though there is concern in the community about the loss of big trees, planting one in the verge is a way of making up for that, and it's an opportunity for a tree planting, and it does save the city the cost of having to plant a tree there. I understand it is the city's responsibility. However, I think it would benefit the development to have additional tree plantings in the verge. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the seconder like to speak to the amendment, particularly the amendment, the first one, 50% of landscaping to be endemic?
I reserve. I think that's been well covered in the debate and the questions.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers on amendment, this first amendment, which is to do with 50% landscaping be endemic species? No other speakers? I will speak to it. I think there is a level of merit in the landscaping being endemic. I'm just going to clarify, just let me pull back, where exactly is it? Is it a separate condition or is it part of the landscaping provision that you're talking about?
I thought it would be simpler just to have it as a separate condition, but it does relate to the landscaping. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just going to quickly scan back to it. Whilst I agree in part with the merits of the proposed, the merits of the condition or the new condition, I'm referring to this for the minute takers, new condition, I have some reservations about whole of site being applied to the endemic species as opposed to all of landscaping to be applied as endemic species. And there are some concerns I've got regarding the application of that.
Sorry, presiding member, I said 50% endemic species, not the entire landscaping endemic species.
Sorry, say that again. You said 50% of the
of the trees to be.
Oh, I beg your pardon. I've taken it down as 50% of landscaping. I beg your pardon. 50% of the trees within the landscaping. Is that what you've just said?
Yes, and if anybody would like to look at the landscaping plan, I think they're already proposing West Australian red flowering gums and what have you. So I don't think it's a huge change that would totally change the design.
Thank you for that clarification. I have taken it down as all landscaping. I have no further comments in the motion. Can I just clarify that minute taker's got it? It is a new condition being that 50% of trees within landscaping be endemic species to the satisfaction of the city. I did not take that down in that manner, and it's been clarified. I have no further comments. We go back to the mover for right of reply and close off debate on that motion only.
Yes, just thank you, presiding member. As I said, I think they've WA red flowering gum and little ghost gum and native frangipani. I think there is already a willingness to have some endemic tree species, but a condition like this, I think for Nedlands would be good as a standard to have across all our developments. And so it looks like the proponent's already trying, and I don't think it will be an onerous condition. Thank you.
Thank you. We've had the right of reply. We are going to the vote on the amendment. All those in favour? It is carried unanimously. We are back to you, Fergus Bennett, on your second amendment, which is the additional street tree. Do you have any further comments? Sorry, that's been moved. Do you have any further comments? And we'll go to a seconder.
my comments are that I believe there is space for a large tree planting, and I think it would benefit the development, and the community would appreciate the addition of a large tree. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is a new condition. With a second, is there a seconder? Sorry, I beg your pardon. It is seconded. Rebecca Coghlan, would you like to speak to the amendment?
I think the street tree, although it is something that the city's verges, however, there has been some loss of canopy due to LPS3, particularly in that area, due to reticulation and the like, and stress, and we've had a very dry period and a long hot summer. It's unprecedented, actually. The tree canopy, as I said before, is incredibly important to Nedlands. It softens the upcoating, and it is a contribution that the developers are very happy usually to contribute to. And then there's a little bit of ownership, and it encourages good use of our verges, and also for pedestrians who are walking down that area towards the Peace Memorial Rose Gardens. They're walking to access transport. This is why we've seen LPS3 along the highway, due to those transport nodes and the main highway from Perth to Fremantle. So there's a lot of pedestrians, and there'll be increasing number when people move into their group dwellings, and it actually encourages livability in the suburb. So it's a really good condition. I hope you support it.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers on this amendment? Yes.
Look, I'm not going to be supporting it. I think this is something that is the responsibility of the city. And I should think that, there's something that the city will pick up, and I know that they do have specific plans about what sort of trees are appropriate wherever. So I'm not going to be supporting it.
Is there any other speakers on this amendment? We'll go back to the mover for right of reply and close of debate.
Thank you, presiding member. Yes, the city does have a preferred tree species list, and so that's why the condition was to the satisfaction of the city. They can recommend the appropriate tree to plant in the verge. And it is appropriate for developers sometimes to make a contribution to the amenity of their verge, because the proponent does have an access way that goes through the verge. They will be, I assume, putting their waste out on their verge. The people will be arriving through the verge. So even though a verge belongs to the city and it's their responsibility, it's in everyone's interest to improve the amenity of their verge, and to make it a positive contribution to the streetscape, instead of just something used for driveways and putting your waste out. So I don't think it's a hugely expensive or onerous condition, and I think usually, as Councillor Coghlan pointed out, usually developers are more than eager for the opportunity to plant a really healthy tree that gets going fast and actually adds to their development by the time it's finished. Thank you.
Thank you. Right of reply has been had. We are going to the vote on additional street tree in the area. All those in favour? Against? Is carried 3-2. Did you get the vote?
Yes.
We move back to yourself, Fergus. Do you have any other comments before we move?
No, thank you.
We're moving to the seconder of the substantive. Sorry, no, we're not on the seconder. You've both spoken. Is there any other speakers on the substantive motion? I'll make some comments. My comments are that the overall proposal is appropriate in the context of its character of the area, is consistent with the planning framework and the site zoning. It is well designed, and it creates, as it already been indicated, a level of diversity of design and housing. Its scale and form is appropriate in the context of the local area. Those are my comments. Is there any other speakers on the item? If not, we move back to mover for right of reply and close of debate.
No further comment.
Debate has been closed. We are going to the motion inclusive of the amendments. All those in favour? Against? It is carried 4-1. Did the minute taker get that?
Yes.
We now move back to the agenda. We move back to the agenda. We have dealt with our items. We have no Form 2 applications and no SAT reconsiderations. The applications are listed, the SAT applications are listed in other business, Part D. There is no general business, and assuming that nobody has any general business they wish to raise. And if not, we close today's meeting at 12:01 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.